my friends, and welcome to Chapter 13. It is a well-known but curious fact that the first bite of an apple always tastes the best, which is why the heroine of a book much more suitable to read than this one spends an entire afternoon eating the first bite of a bushel of apples. But even this Anakic little girl, the word Anakic here means apple-loving, never tasted a bite as wonderful as the Baudelaire orphans' first bite of the apple from the tree their parents had hybridized with the horseradish. The apple was not as bitter as the Baudelaire orphans would have guessed, and the horseradish gave the juice of the apple a slight sharp edge, like the air on a winter's morning. But of course, the biggest appeal of the apple, offered by the incredibly deadly viper, was its immediate effect on the deadly fungus growing inside them. From the moment the Baudelaire's teeth bit down on the apple, first violets, and then Klaus's, and then Sunny's, the stalks and caps of the medusoid mycelium began to shrink, and within moments all traces of the dreaded mushroom had withered away, and the children could breathe clearly and easily, hugging one another in relief. The Baudelaires found themselves laughing, which is a common reaction among people who have narrowly escaped death. And the snake seemed to be laughing too, although perhaps it was just appreciating the youngest Baudelaire scratching behind its tiny hooded ears. We should each have another apple, Violet said, standing up, to make sure we've consumed enough horseradish. And we should collect enough apples for all of the islanders, Klaus said. They must be just as desperate as we were. Stock pot, Sunny said, and walked to the rack of pots on the ceiling, where the snake helped her take down an enormous metal pot that could hold a great number of apples, and in fact had been used to make an enormous vat of applesauce a number of years previously. You two start picking apples, Violet said, walking to the periscope. I want to check on Kit Snicket. The flooding of the coastal shelf must have begun by now, and she must be terrified. I hope she avoided the medusoid mycelium, Klaus said. I hate to think of what that would do to her child. First, Sunny said, which meant something like, we should rescue her promptly. The islanders are in worse shape than Kit, Klaus said. We should go to the island to Ishmael's tent first, and then go rescue Kit. Violet peered through the periscope and frowned. We shouldn't go to Ishmael's tent, she said. We need to fill that stock pot with apples and get to the coastal shelf as quickly as we can. What do you mean? Klaus said. They're leaving, Violet said, and I'm sorry to say it was true. Through the periscope, the eldest Baudelaire could see the shape of the outrigger and the figures of the poisoned passengers who were pushing it along the coastal shelf towards the library raft where Kit Snicket still lay. The three children each peered through the periscope and then looked at one another. They knew they should be hurrying. But for a moment, none of the Baudelaires could move, as if they were unwilling to travel any further in their sad history or see one more part of their story come to an end. If you have read this far in the chronicle of the Baudelaire orphans, and I certainly hope you have not, then you know we have reached the 13th chapter of the 13th volume in this sad history, and so you know the end is near, even though this chapter is so lengthy that you might never reach the end of it. But perhaps you do not yet know what the end really means. The end is a phrase which refers to the completion of a story or the final moment of some accomplishment, such as a secret errand or a great deal of research. And indeed, this 13th volume marks the completion of my investigation into the Baudelaire case, which required much research, a great many secret errands, and the accomplishments of a number of my comrades. From a trolley driver to a botanical hybridization expert with many typewriter repair people in between. But it cannot be said that the end contains the end of the Baudelaire story, any more than the bad beginning contained its beginning. The children's story began long before that terrible day on Briny Beach. But there would have to be another volume to chronicle when the Baudelaires were born, and when their parents married, and who was playing the violin in the candlelit restaurant when the Baudelaire parents first laid eyes on one another, and what was hidden inside that violin, and the childhood of the man who orphaned the girl who put it there. And even then, it could not be said that the Baudelaire story had not begun, because you would still need to know about a certain tea party held in a penthouse suite, and the baker who made the scones served at that tea party, and the baker's assistant who smuggled the secret ingredient into the scone batter through a very narrow drain pipe, and how a crafty volunteer created the illusion of fire in the kitchen simply by wearing a certain dress, and jumping around. And even then, the beginning of the story would be as far away as the shipwreck that left the Baudelaire parents as castaways on the coastal shelf, as far away from the outrigger on which the islanders would depart. One could say, in fact, that no story really has a beginning and that no story really has an end, as all of the world's stories are jumbled as the items of the Arboretum, with their details and secrets all heaped together so that the whole story from beginning to end depends on how you look at it. We might even say that the world is always in medias res a Latin, a phrase which here means in the midst of something, or in the middle of a narrative, and that it is impossible to solve any mystery or find the root of any trouble. And so the end is really the middle of a story, as many people in this history will live long past the close of chapter 13, or even the beginning of the story, as a new child arrives in the world at the chapter's close. But one cannot sit in the midst of things forever. Eventually, one must face the end is near, and the end of the end is quite near indeed. So if I were you, I would not read the end of the end, as it contains the end of a notorious villain, but also the end of a brave and noble sibling, and the end of the colonists' stay on the island. As they sail off the end of the coastal shelf, the end of the end contains all these ends, and that does not depend on how you look at it. So it might be best for you to stop looking at the end before the end of the end arrives, and to stop reading the end before you read the end. As the stories that end in the end, that began in the bad beginning, are beginning to end now. The Baudelaires hurriedly filled their stock pot with apples and ran to the coastal shelf, hurrying over the brae as quickly as they could. It was past lunchtime, and the waters of the sea were already flooding the shelf, so the water was much deeper than it had been since the children's arrival. Violet and Klaus had to hold the stock pot high in the air, and Sunny and the incredibly deadly viper climbed up on the elder Baudelaire's shoulders to ride along with the bitter apples. The children could see Kit Snicket on the horizon, still lying on the library raft as the waters rose to soak the first few layers of the books. And alongside the strange cube was the outrigger. As they drew closer, they saw that the islanders had stopped pushing the boat and were climbing aboard, pausing from time to time to cough. While at the end of the outrigger was the figure of Ishmael, seated in his clay chair, gazing at his poisoned colonists and watching the children approach. "Stop!" Violet cried when they were close enough to be heard. "We've discovered a way to dilute the poison." All right, we're going to stop there. I'm going to have to break up chapter 13 into a few videos, but I will continue with the next one very soon.